Cerdo elvem, etiam vivere, da eundum quonimo angeti.
Chapter 3 Disbelief. Alex ran down the mountain as fast as he could, but it's been raining and his feet was in mud, so it slowed him down a great deal. But when he got to the village, he was at awe, because he seen the great stronghold that he had been in earlier. It had been demolished, pieces of it everywhere. Alex noticed some heavy tracks and like wheels, and he knew what a catapult was, and apparently it had wheeled through here and it had took down the tire. And then he seen a body of a soldier on the side of the road, and he leaned down to take his pulse, but he was dead. And Alex instantly jumped to his feet and started off toward his house, because he seen the one-eyed goblin and all these other buildings that blaze. They've been set on fire. So he quickly runs to his house, and he seen the house in flames. He pulled his cloak up over his nose and mouth so he could keep the smoke from getting in, and he rushed into the house without thinking, for his own safety, hollering for his mother. He found his mother, and she was laying in the middle of the floor, but a heavy beam has came down across her legs. Alex got in there, and he tried to lift. He even took his sword and tried to, pry, and he heard a little voice in his head said, "It's no good. It won't work." And he still couldn't figure out where this little voice is coming from. So he seized his sword, and about that time, he felt somebody tap him on the shoulder. He spins around, and it's Tessa. She goes, "Alex, we must get your mother out of here." He said, "But this beam, it's too heavy." And she goes, "I can help." So she gets on the other side, up under it with her shoulder. And even though that she doesn't embrace her orc side, this is where her orc strength, the orc blood that's running through her veins, come in handy. Because her eyes flashed red, and she got real angry, and she started to lift. She lifted it. Alex was at awe when he seen her lift this beam. And she lifted it and actually got her hands under it and threw it to the side. And she goes down quickly, and they both scooped his mom up under each arm, and they get out of the house just when it collapses. They both collapsed to the ground and started coughing and hacking because the smoke was, And then she said, "Is she all right?" Alex rolls his mom over, and he signs, because he could tell that she had been through a lot. And she opened her eyes, barely, and she said, "Alex, is that you?" And he said, "Yes, Mom, I'm here." She said, "I'm afraid that you're going to have to continue without me." And she said, "If your father has passed on, I'll be seeing him soon." And he goes, "Don't say that, Mom. You're going to be okay." And she goes, "You be a good boy." And then her eyes slowly drooped, and then her head just cocked to the side. Alex quickly scooped her up and said, "We got to get her to the church. And there's healers there that could heal her." I said, Mother Tall can heal her." Well, he scooped her up and started that way, and Tessa close behind him. Then all of a sudden, a shadowy figure appears in front of them, and it was a big orc, Mino orc, just like the one he's seen up in the mountain. It was a gray orc, and the orc pulled his sword and said, "Where do you think you're going, children?" And then all of a sudden he sort of lifted his head in the air. He sniffed. He goes, "I smell orc, female." And then he looked at the young lady and he goes, "Ah, you have orc blood in your veins." And she said, "That might be so, monster, but I am no orc. I am only human." And he laughed, you know. And then all of a sudden, Alex, not realizing, Tessa just lost it. I mean, she went berserk. She had a sword on her back that she had got from the blacksmith shop. And she had pulled her sword and she ran toward the orc. The orc came up with his blade as well, and they locked blades. And even though the orc had took a good stance, she was pushing him back. And you could see just the anguish on her face and her eyes red. And he just continued to laugh, you know, because he knew that he was in trouble, because he could feel the strength of this young lady. And he was like, you know, he was flabbergasted. And then all of a sudden, she stooped down, and he continued through, and she kneeled all the way down, and she thrusted her sword through his abdomen, all the way through to his back. And then he slumped over. Tessa pulled her blade out and wiped her blade on the orc, and then as she walked past him, kicked him in the rear where he flattened completely out. And she said, "Monster." And Alex just stood there, you know, until Tessa just heaving, you know, she just breathing real hard. And she finally looked like she was calming down, and Alex came to his senses and said, "We got to get my mom to the church." So they continued to the church, and they seen two small figures, and they were around another body laying there. And when they got there, Alex said, "Oh no!" And Mother Tall was laying there with. There was two girls. They were both 10 years old. And this is Tara and Mara, and they were orphaned, and they've been staying in the church with the mother of the church. And she was laying there, and you could tell that she had passed on, and the kids were weeping, and they didn't know what to do. And Alex said, "Well, that was the only one that could heal my mother." And that's when Tessa went over and felt of his mother's pulse and said, "She's gone, Alex." And he goes, "No." And he dropped to his knees and started weeping. And then they heard sounds of like a wagon. And then they heard some more orcs coming down the road. And she goes, "Alex." And Alex stood to his feet, and they seen 4 orcs, heavily armored, with these big old, big old spears and everything. And she goes, "Alex, I think we're in trouble." Well, Alex pulled his blade, and she did too. And they thought there was just 4, but there was really 5, as one come around from the wagon, and they all pulled weapons and started in on the children. And then he said, "Looks like we're going to have some fresh meat in our stew." And about that time, the two 10-year-olds, Mara and Tara, they stood up and they grabbed each other's hands, and a circle, a globe, formed around them, like a clear circular globe. I mean, you could see it, but it was almost like glass, like they were in a crystal ball of some sort. And their eyes just went completely white. Well, the cloud, it's been raining, and the clouds were getting thicker and swirling and everything. And all of a sudden, the wind picked up tremendously. I mean, and right in front of Tessa and Alex, they quickly hunker down, because a twister comes out of nowhere, hits right in the middle of 4 of the orcs, and started to twist. And they got caught up into the vortex. And as they were taken up in the vortex, their weapons, they lose lose hold of their weapons and the spears were twisted up in there, and part of the wagon went up in the twister, and all this debris was hitting the orcs. Their own weapons were stabbing them and stabbing each other, and they were screaming and hollering, and this tornado kept up for a good 5 minutes, and then it just dissipated. And when it dissipated, the orcs just fell to the ground, all battered and cut up, and 3 of them were dead from all the wounds that they had suffered inside of the twister. And one was pretty much barely alive. He rolls over, and then the other one started toward the children, and out of nowhere, a lightning bolt comes down and hits between the two. Alex and Tessa could feel the shock waves. I mean, they could feel it through the ground. And the 2 orcs were just fried. It was crackling, and you could see the lightning just course through the orcs, and they shake, and then they died. And Alex and Tessa looked back at the 2 girls in awe, because they're sitting there, with their eyes all white and holding hands, and then they let go of each other's hand, and they fell to a slump, and they almost looked like they were asleep. They just instantly tired. Now, they had no idea what had happened. They knew that it came from the girls, but how they tapped into that energy, they did not know. By that time, Dolan comes around, and he goes, "What fireworks?" Dolan was a little dwarf, and he come in, and he seen Alex with his mother, and he goes, "Oh, lad, I am so sorry." He goes, "I am so, so sorry." And then Tessa, she said, "Where's my father?" And he said, your father had followed the orcs." "Which way did they go?" "To the mountains." "But," he said, "you must not follow. He had told me that you're supposed to go with the other kids to the stronghold." And she said, "Other kids?" And he pointed back, and there was 6 kids following him. He said, "This is all that is left." He said, "There are still a few people here in the village, and there is a lot of bodies." He said, "Alex," he said, "I want you to take these kids, you and Tessa, take them up to the stronghold, and take the 2 here too." He said, "I'll take care of the bodies here." He said, "Me and the other villagers will bury them." And Alex didn't want to leave his mother. He said, "Lass, these kids lass and lad, these kids need you." And so Alex, he straightened up and he said, "Yes, sir." And Tessa chimed in too, and he said, "So gather them up and get them ready." So they gathered all the kids up. Alex picked up Mara, and then Tessa picked up Tara, and they carried the 2, and the 6 kids followed behind them. And they started into the forest to make it to the stronghold. But as they go down the path, it starts to get darker and darker. And she goes, "I got a bad feeling about this, Alex." Well, that's the end of this chapter. The next chapter is Into the Stronghold. So I'll see y'all later.